Alright guys, and now, next thing that we're going to take a quick look at is the whole idea of using our HTTP server and how firewall interacts with it. Much like SE Linux, firewall can create some issues, especially when you get into some kind of funkier configurations, but you want to let people get at your web server, and you want to still be able to keep your system itself fairly safe. So you have one of two choices. You can either disable the firewall like we did with SE Linux, or we can leave the firewall enabled and just allow certain ports through so that we're able to let other places communicate with us. We're going to take a look at it kind of working in all directions here now in a second. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to take a look at the fact that the web server is working. So we see our local host is working. The file we made already, called myfile, actually does show our little test page that we created. I want to actually find out what my IP address is. I can right-click on my little icon here, and I can go and get my connection information. And you'll see that this information here gives me an IP address. This IP address I'm going to replace with the local host part. Let's just get rid of the rest of it for right now. As you can see, I get my Fedora test page again. And just to make sure that this is indeed still our server, when I do my myfile.html, I actually get to see it. The reason for that is the whole idea of this host file that we'll do up another video in a little while to show you how that host file works, or your DNS file could easily substitute for that, but in our case we're going to take a look at the host file instead of complicating things with the DNS setup. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to just bring in a browser from my local machine, because I'm working in a virtual machine right now. And this Chrome browser I have with the address in it is actually off my own desktop. When I try to go to this address here, I better do it this way. I'm going to have to wait for a little while. After a period of time, it's going to time out on me. The reason for that is that our Linux system actually has a firewall turned on. Because our Linux system has a firewall turned on, we need to take a look at what our firewall rules are. In this particular case, I'll almost guarantee that the web port is being blocked by our firewall. So nothing's happened. It says that, oh, we can't connect. What are we going to do? Well, what we're going to do is we're going to go to System, then Administration, and then Firewall. Now, as the firewall program loads, it's going to ask us to get authenticated, because we're not allowed to access this unless we're actually the super user. So we'll go and close that, and now the authentication window pops up. So again, we supply the super user password, and our firewall starts. You can see there's a whole bunch of different things here that don't have check marks next to them. Anything that you want to have available, it's going to have a check mark next to it. The only thing that has a check mark next to it that's in this list is SSH. So I can connect to this server from anywhere that can get at that IP address through the network by using this address, but that's the only way I can do it. That's the only thing I can do. You notice that the web server, the HTTP server port, is turned off. So before I turn just web port off, I'm just going to disable our firewall for a bit and hit apply. It's going to warn me that that might not be the best idea, but I'm going to say OK anyway. Now at this point the firewall is disabled, as we can see here. If I come back to over here, which is my desktop, and hit enter, now I get my Fedora test page, and so we can ensure that it is actually our system. My test file is also there. When I come back over to my desktop or my virtual machine, and I enable my firewall. Remember now, this is the default firewall now. I haven't made any changes to it. I just turned it on and turned it off again. I should say turned it off and turned it on again. Now when I try to refresh here, it's not going to find this file. It might actually leave it loaded as a part of a cache where it's actually found it once before, but you can see that it's still sending requests, nothing's happening. So I'm going to come over here and I want to make another little change to it. I'm going to actually allow the HTTP port to work. Let's see if it timed out yet. And see, it just timed out. Now at this point, all I did is I'm not turning it off this time. I just have the web port enabled. I apply this. I'll say, yeah, sure, why not? So it's all been added. Everything seems good. My firewall is still enabled. Now, even though my firewall was enabled last time, and I couldn't connect to things this time, I can. And you can see there's our test page. So the long and the short of it is, if we want to be able to manage our system to allow other systems to see it, we need to be able to set our firewall settings up appropriately. In this particular case, it's port 80 is the one that we're worrying about. We will be doing a lot of work later on using some other ports. When we do use those other ports, we're going to need to come in and make some changes to this firewall software. Again, this software can be configured from the command line, and it can be configured from some text files, and there's also a little setup utility from the command prompt that you can use to do it. I generally find this works reasonably well for most of what you're doing. So that'll cover off getting our HTTP to work through a firewall. Keep one thing in mind now. You also need to make sure that any firewall you have on the machine that you have going to the server allows for your outgoing connection to the web server as well. If you have firewall problems, can happen on both ends, so you just want to keep an eye on that, and that's why sometimes you have to be able to turn them off for a second to see which side is the problem might exist on. So sometimes you might have to turn off your local firewall for a minute. Sometimes you might have to turn off your server firewall for a minute. Not generally a good idea to leave your firewall turned off for long stretches of time, however. Anyway, I guess that will do it for right now, and there should be some more videos coming soon.